everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty. If you're new here, welcome, welcome. My returning art and craft friends, I'm so glad you're taking another creative break with me today. Today I'm going to be showing you step by step of how I create a set of Prim Pilgrims using some coffee dyed fabric, a little bit of paint, and some yarn for their hair. I'm going to be showing you how I attach the hair using a felting needle. Now I'm going to be using a sewing machine, but you could easily do this with glue, hot glue, whatever you might want to use to create yours. But I'm going to show you, even if you're a beginning sewer like me, you could still create something super cute. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. I have two hosts today. We have Dawn with Shabby Needs Bling and Shelly with Repurposed My Way. Now you're going to find the links to their channels inside of the description box, as well as the playlist for all of the other creators who are participating in today's collaboration. Definitely take some time, check out their channels, and you're definitely going to want to hit that playlist because all the videos will roll one after the other, and I'm sure you're going to find some wonderful creative inspiration to decorate your home with this fall. Well, let's go ahead and I'll begin with the beginning steps. The first step in creating my pilgrims was to create a pattern. I do have a downloadable pattern that you can go over to my Ko-fi shop and go ahead and purchase it. It's very reasonably priced. There'll be a clickable link down in the side of the description box. I like using a cardstock to copy my patterns off. They're just a little bit more sturdier than what copy paper would be, although copy paper would work just as well. Once I have my papers all copied off, I go ahead and cut my pattern pieces out. I want to cut out on the dark lines. There is some information on there of where you would stitch and where you would cut later on. All the pattern pieces are cut with a double layer of fabric. Most of the pattern pieces have a little indication of where you would like to leave an area for an open area. Most of these are going to be filled like in a pillow style, so make sure you look at your pattern pieces to know where you need to stitch and where you need to keep open. On the collar pieces, there is a part that you only cut just a small little triangle in the front. Lay your pieces down and then go ahead and trace around them. I like using a friction pin for this process. Put pins in the middle of your surface to hold your fabric together and rough cut around your pieces. I sewed mine on a sewing machine, and I'm definitely a beginner and my lines aren't quite all matching up with what I drew, but in the end it still looks really cute. Once I had it sewed, I go ahead and do a seam allowance all the way around and then take my scissors and make little nips, especially in the tight corners. This is going to help my fabric turn better when I turn it right side out. Once I had my edges all nipped and clipped, I wanted to go ahead and try a box corner. I'm going to spread out my seam on the edge and I'm going to sew across my edge, creating kind of like a box shoulder. And then it was just a beginning step for me. I've never tried it before. I gave it a whirl. It was somewhat successful. I do have kind of a straight edge there, so my pilgrims are able to sit up quite nicely, but it definitely could use some improvement. But I pinned it and then took it to my sewing machine and sewed across those edges. And then once I had it sewed, I nipped the corners. And you can kind of tell right here when I turn it out, it does kind of look like a box, so I'm going to call it good enough for a first time try. This is the center of my hat brim, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that piece because I stitched it all the way closed. Then I'm going to turn it the right side out, and that will be the brim of my hat. Once my collars were stitched, I turned them the right side out, found the center of where my collar was, drew a little dot, and then created my triangle. I used my friction pen for this. Friction pens will disappear if you put heat on them, so it's a great pen to be able to do this with. Went ahead and cut my little triangle out because I could find the center more easily. And then any of the leftover pen mark, I just went ahead and used my heat tool and made it disappear. Now to go ahead and create the weighted little bean bags inside, I use these glass beads. My first time using them, you definitely want to have something underneath you because these little beads are super tiny and they will go everywhere. Once I had them in there, I just use some needle and thread and stitch my bag closed. This is going to add the weight to the bottom of my pilgrims so they'll sit up nicely. To create my pilgrim hat, I took the top of my hat and the brim of my hat, and I slid the top of the hat through the hole I cut. Slid my fingers inside so I had a hole, and then I clipped those two layers of fabric together. I wanted to be able to stitch the top of my hat all the way around my brim. This was an easy way to hold it together, but I think you could use straight pins just as well. I just went ahead and did a simple over and under stitch all the way around my hat. Adding polyfill is the next step, and this brand of polyfill is one that I really do like. When doing the polyfill, it's best to use small pieces. Go ahead and push the polyfill up as high as you can, and then use some sort of tool to push it to the insides of the corners. A wooden dowel, the end of a pencil, works great for this. When doing larger pieces, I found it works best to take a big ball of the polyfill, put it in the corner of my elbow area, and then be able to hold the fabric with both hands and fill it that way. When doing these little dolls, it's really important that the necks have a lot of the filling in it and your head is well stuffed. This will make sure that your head will stay upright. Here I'm going and putting that little beanbag pouch that I have to be able to weight the bottom of my Pilgrim so it will sit nicely. I had kind of wished I had made the hole a little larger. It would have made it easier to get that bag in there. Once the bag was in and I had all the fill around it, I went ahead and just simply took some thread and needle and sewed it shut. Give your pieces a little massage, and this will help any of the lumps and bumps and smooth out your polyfill inside. Up next is to do a little painting. I'm going to be painting the bottom part of my Pilgrims this ebony black. To paint fabric, it works pretty well is to add a little bit of water to your paint, give it a stir, and this will just help glide the paint across your fabric so much easier. Fabric paints completely different than wood does. Take extra care when painting the black that it does not get onto the face of your Pilgrims. The top part only gets coffee stains, so any extra black paint would show up. Once your pieces are painted, go ahead and give them a quick dry. You also want to do the black paint on your hat. Once your paint is dry, take a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper and give it a light scuffing. Be careful not to sand too much. You can go through your fabric. I used a mix of 2 tablespoons of instant coffee and 1 cup of warm tap water for my coffee stain for my pieces. To dry them, I dried them in my oven at 200 degrees. You can see how stiff the fabric is now for the hat just by having that paint dried. When drying fabric in the oven, just stay close by and watch your items. Coffee staining does really add a primitive look to these pieces. The first piece I'm going to be stitching is the collar. I'm going to be using a doll needle to be making a running stitch at the top of my collar. I want to just take the needle and run my stitch back and forth to create a gathered neckline. Once I have the stitching all the way around, I go ahead and just place it over the top, come to the back and pull the strings, and gather my neckline. Center the V in the front, and then go ahead and tie a knot in the back. To begin the process for the stitching of her face, I find the center just by a general mark. I use a pencil and I mark down the center, just a little tick mark here and there, and then line up my ruler and draw a straight line for my nose. You can also erase just a tiny bit if you need to. To finish off the collar lines, I simply used some black buttons that I had added thread to and hot glued them to the center of my collar lines. To do the stitching on my doll's face, I'm using a 5-inch doll needle threaded with Aunt Lydia's crochet thread, the number 10 size. I'm coming in from the back, pulling my thread all the way through, but I'm not going to put a knot at the end, not yet anyway. I'm going to be creating a running stitch down her nose. I'm going to be following that pencil line that I drew. I'm coming right underneath my fabric, not going all the way down to the area where the polyfill is. Coming down, doing a stitch, coming back at the bottom of that stitched area I just did, and coming up again. So underneath there is where I had my stitch, coming down a stitch, and then pulling it through. And that's how I'm going to be creating the running stitch all the way down her nose. Once I get down to the bottom, I'm going to end my stitch coming underneath, then going at an angle where my thumb is to create her smile. Coming out over there, and then I'm going to come across my doll face, go underneath my fabric, coming up slightly a little shorter than I put my first one in, pulling it out, and then coming back through a little bit shorter there. Now you want to be able to go back up to the top of where you came in to bring your needle out the same hole, if you can, have it brought out, and then once you get it pulled, that's when you're going to tie the knot in the back. To mark my eyes where I want them, I take the pencil and I go off to the sides and just make one little dot for where I want to have my eyes. I come back through that same hole where I started the top of my nose with some more length of my thread. And I'm going to be making little X's, little star marks for my eyes.
I'm going to start in the back, again, not tying a knot right away, coming up at the one point, go over and across. So I'm going to come across my eye, then take my needle and push it underneath to the far end, right underneath where I had put my first mark. Then I'm going to come back up and then go to the middle of that area and pop my needle up. It's easy to get your thread tangled up in this spot, so I did have to work it a little back and forth just to make sure I wasn't creating a knot in the middle of my eye. Now I needed to go up to that part there, to the center, and I came out the back of that hole. Once I get through the back, I'm going to be coming back through again to the other side to do the other eye. Use your finger to be able to feel where your needle is underneath. That will give you an idea of where you're pushing your needle through. So come out, come over and under to create your first little X. I got all tangled up here and I needed to take a little bit of time to untangle my needle. But if all else fails, you can go ahead and just pull your needle off your thread and pull your stitch out and start over again. So don't worry if you do get mixed up, you can redo it. So here I am starting, going underneath again, coming out to create my first X, or at least trying, and then coming under and out the back. Once you're out the back, go ahead and tie your knot. Doing the stitch work on these little Prim characters really does bring them to life. It does take a little practice, but really it's not that difficult to create these little stitch patterns, and is well worth the time of taking the time to learn how to do them. In the end, it really does bring them to life and gives them a lot of personality. To attach the hat to my pilgrim guy, I went ahead and took my needle. I used the 5-inch doll needle, and I went through the front of his head and then up through the brim area, right where the hat and the brim connected, and then carried my stitch all the way to the back of his head, up through the brim area on the back. Using the 5-inch doll needle really does help in this area. I can do it all the way through the hat and the head. I basically just kept on stitching all the way through until I got to the end of my head area and the hat area. Once it was stitched, I didn't really feel like I needed any glue to help keep it anchored together. I wanted to add some hair to my pilgrims, and using a felting needle was a great way to use it. You don't have to use any glue when using a felting needle. The yarn that I chose from Joann Fabrics, and it has a very much a wool-like characteristic to it without being a roving wool. I simply make some loops at the top, take my felting needle. This felting needle is a Clover brand, and it's a fine tooth needle. And you basically tap it up and down, and it will connect the yarn to the polyfill inside, and you won't have to glue your hair. It's a great look. It's a great tool to add if you're going to be making Prims. So for my gal, I just went ahead and did the hair all the way around. Took about 3 strands right away, and I'm going to be doing that same tapping motion to the center of her head to attach the hair. I started a little lower on her forehead, tapping in the center. This way I was going to be able to fill her head out just a little bit more and make it a little bit wider. When doing the felting needle, you just basically concentrate in one area, and that's where it's going to attach your hair. So you can see where the part is that I made right where her hairline is. And then kind of just worked my little individual strands all the way to the back. Brought them off to the side and then gathered them together, continued on with that little tapping motion to connect the fibers to the polyfill underneath. To create her little bonnet, I just used some more coffee stain fabric, about 6.5 inches wide and about 14 inches long, wrapped it around her head after I folded it back just a little bit on the edges, and then made a little fold in the back. And I glued it together just to tack it a little bit, and then I added a little bit of more coffee stain around her neck to give it a tie in the front. Between the glue and the little neckline of tying it, it held it perfectly fine. I want to say a special thank you to Don and Shelly for hosting today's collaboration. Take some time and click that link inside of the description box to their channels, as well as click that playlist and see all the other videos that people have created for today's event. I'm sure you'll find plenty of fall inspiration inside of their videos. One of the final steps I did was to add a little bit of blushing to each of my Pilgrims' cheeks. I wanted more of an orangish coral look for my cheeks, so I made my own color. I combined a little bit of that bubblegum pink and a little bit of pumpkin spice to warm up that cheek color. When blushing cheeks, you really do want to make sure you start out with light layers of paint and then go darker. Once the paint's on, you can't take it off, so it's best to always start light and then build your layers. Adding the little blush cheeks to these characters really do bring them to life and adds just that little bit of extra whimsy to these characters. I have one more little detail I would like to add. I created a buckle using some jewelry wire that's easy to bend. I made it into a square shape and then just basically wrapped my wire around to make that pilgrim clip in the front of his hat. I ripped some of the coffee-stained fabric to create a band to attach the little buckle to. I had created the buckle with that centerpiece, so when I took the fabric, I simply thread it through the back and then up and over that little buckle, creating that very much that pilgrim look, or that look that we think of when we think of a pilgrim buckle. Added a little bit of glue to the back to hold it on, and it worked perfectly and gave him that really sweet little pilgrim look. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at what these guys look like all set up on my fireplace mantle. My mantle's getting fairly full with all of the other Prim items that I've created for this fall. Check out some of the other videos on my channel if you like to create in this style as well. If you're new to my channel and you like art and crafts, come on over and see what I have to offer. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Hopefully you'll come back and see me soon, and next time you'll create right along with me.